I totally believe in telling stories. But I don't think what Jesus does is try to tell a very familiar story in the culture and then bring it around to a spiritual truth. I think he's trying to kind of paint these really strange pictures.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're based. For us, it's a lovely afternoon. At least it is for me, because I'm in Sicily, in the south of Italy. It's warm here. Our houses are not that warm, but outside it is. Whereas my guest today, Glen, is from England. Glen, nice to see you. Welcome.
Hello, Robert.
What's the weather like in England right now?
The weather right now, I don't know. The English are always talking about the weather. I'm from Australia, and the English call the place where I live, Eastbourne, the Sunshine Coast. My Australian family has a different view on things. They call it the Unshine Coast, which I think is very cool. But the thing is, the English are always talking about the weather, and the weather is the least interesting weather in all the world. Like right today, it's basically 13 degrees and cloudy, which could be any month of the year. That could be January, that could be August. It's always 13 degrees and cloudy. So, I think the English need to get better things to talk about. That's what I think.
That is basically our winter in Sicily. That's usually that's the coldest we get, and as soon as we get to like 8 degrees, it's painfully cold for us. but I'm sure that you're used to warm weather as well, being from Australia. But I asked, yeah. So let me introduce you, and I asked Perplexity AI to give me some information on you. So just I'll read this, and then you'll tell me if that's wrong or not.
The robot, yeah.
Yes, basically, yeah. But I can already see some things that are really right. So Glen is an evangelist, author, a filmmaker, director of Speak Life, a UK-based ministry that uses creative media and storytelling to share the message of Jesus. Originally from Australia, Glen is now based in England, where he has spent years thinking deeply about how to communicate an unchanging gospel in a rapidly changing culture. What would you say?
How does Perplexity know that I've been thinking deeply? That's weird. But apart from that, hang on, that's exactly so. That is scarily true. Yeah. Spot on.
It is. You're also the author of several books, one of which I really liked, The Air We Breathe, and I've suggested to many. I'm not saying this because you're here, but really I did. And in this book, you argue how many of the values in our secular world really find their origin in Christianity, and how Christianity has been impactful to what we believe in, and one of such as equality, compassion, and freedom. So I've also read that you and I follow you on social media. I've been following you for a while, so I'm not a stalker, but you're on social media, so I can see what you do. But you've been speaking at churches and universities across the UK and internationally, and your videos are on relevant topic, things that are happening all around the world, and they are watched by many. But really what I appreciate the most about you is how your creativity never comes at a cost with clarity. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is the fact that, we are to preach the gospel in a creative way, but we need to be clear about what we mean and what the gospel is by not changing it. Because as soon as we do change the gospel, then it's going to be a gospel that doesn't save. Another kind of gospel, like Paul says in Galatians. So basically that's I want to thank you again for being here, and that's why I thought that it might be very helpful for us to listen to you and to listen to what you think about some of the questions that we're gonna talk about. So yeah.
I guess we'll see whether it's worthwhile. I'm very
but something I was forgetting is this, which is for me like a kind of elephant in the room. So I started a podcast with in Italy that's called Speak Life.
Hey, fantastic.
Yes, exactly. That I knew that would be your reaction, and it wasn't because I copied you, but I was thinking about this song by Toby Mac that does, it's like does speak life. I'm not a singer, but that's the reason why. So this episode will be posted on Speak Life, the not original one, but it's good to have the original offer.
How do you say it in Italian?
I mean, it's in English, Speak Life, but yeah. But in Italian, if you were to translate it, you would say parlare di vita.
Parlare di vita. Okay.
Yes, that's good.
How's the gesticulation? Yeah.
So yes, it's always the same. It's always the same. It's always the same. But yeah, so the first question I want to ask you is this. So you and your team built Speak Life around creative media and storytelling as vehicles for the gospel. How did you land on that approach, and what have you learned about the difference between packaging the gospel creatively and actually changing it?
We didn't land as though there was a target on the ground somewhere in the distance, and we took careful aim and found ourselves right on target. I think creativity is very much like archaeology. I think Stephen King uses this analogy in his book on writing. He says, creativity is not like architecture. With architecture, you have a plan, you've got your blueprints, you lay your foundations, you build up the walls and then the roof, and it's all very planned. Archaeology is you do a dig and, oh, what's that? Oh, it's a fossil, but what's the shape of the fossil? I need to do a little bit of a digging, and, oh, I thought it would go off to the left. No, it goes off to the right, and I need to do some more digging over there. And by the end of the process, it's something that you didn't quite know where you would end up at the beginning of the process, but you sort of had a hunch, and you followed your nose, and you followed where the thing was leading you, and you're not in charge of it. There's something that's already there that you're kind of uncovering. And I think every creative person goes on that kind of journey. And I think that building organizations and institutions is much more like that. It's not archaeology. I know exactly what this building is going to look like in 10 years' time. It's much more like, it's not architecture. It is archaeology, where you are following something that God has given to you and something that God has put across your path. And so in 2012, I did a poem at Christmas that became known as the Anti-Santy Ranty. And then it was for a Christmas concert that I was speaking at on December the 22nd or something. And my friend said, let's film it. And so we filmed it on the 23rd and we uploaded it on the 24th of December. And it had some tens of thousands of views by Christmas Day. And we sort of thought, oh, that's interesting. And then we did an Easter thing and that did quite well. And then we did a Halloween thing that did really well. And we were like, oh, is this a thing? And I guess that's like your fossil, is this a thing?
Yeah.
We need to dig around it and find it. And so that began our presence on YouTube. And it began my devotion to creative evangelism, that I really think the scriptures, for instance, are incredibly creative and incredibly evangelistic, and they do both together. And in the Bible, it's not a trade-off between creativity and evangelism. The scriptures are incredibly creative. There's all sorts of genres that are employed, whether it's song lyrics or whether it's genealogies or whether it's how to build a tabernacle or whether it's biography or whether it's apocalyptic or prophetic literature. There are so many different ways of proclaiming the message of Jesus. And I've just become really obsessed with the fact that creativity and evangelism just kind of belong together, not as a zero-sum game that you've always got to trade off, but as the best of friends that are kind of complements to one another. And so we've just kind of been following that trajectory and wherever the Lord has taken us. And now we're at the stage where, our YouTube channel has grown really pleasingly and our Instagram presence, and we've got this sort of online presence that then draws people a little bit deeper to 321, which is our online evangelistic course, which again is creative evangelism. It's using stories to tell the good news of Jesus. And then it's a bit of a pipeline from the fast and wide of YouTube to the slow and deep of 321 to in-person embodied worship in the church. And that's the way that this organization has grown. But if you'd asked me in 2012 if I thought that this was where we were going to be, I was like, no, I just tripped over a little fossil called the anti-Santi-Ranti, and I've been following that trajectory ever since.
I guess that's how we find out when God wants something to work or not, and He wanted this to work. Yeah, but as you know, as Youth for Christ, we work mainly with teenagers and young people, and so I guess our main focus is not because we just love young people, but this is our main focus. So that's who we look at, and we kind of study and understand how they work, what they think, and so on. And what we're seeing today is that the world is kind of different to what it was in 2012. Not in some regards, not in all regards, I guess. Because things, if you look at history, it's always a cycle, and things are more or less the same. And that's why we can read the Bible and then say, "Oh, I understand that. I can see how I'm in this." But maybe what it changes is the appearance of it. I would say, and today, so we can say that young people seem genuinely drawn to spirituality, mysticism, deconstruction, meaning making, and all this kind of stuff. But often they recoil from organized religion. I don't know what it is like, and I mean, I know a little bit, but I know in Italy how it works, and young people don't want to go to church, or they often say that they believe in a higher God, higher entity, but they do not believe in the institution of the church. So, in your experience, thinking about all of these things, what do you think they're actually searching for, and how close it is to what the gospel really offers, what they're looking for? Maybe what I want to say is this: the question I'm really asking is this: we've been reading about all the research that has been going on young people and being more and more spiritual. And I think that question is about spirituality. But really, are they looking for the God that we're speaking about, or are they looking about something else? And how can we address that question that they're asking?
People are looking for all sorts of things, but I think what I'm hopeful about at the moment is that Christianity is now one of, if not the leading option for people who want to discover a higher purpose. I think when I was growing up, it was absolutely unquestioned that the church are the bad guys, that there is a unique institution among institutions that you should not trust, and it's called the Church of Jesus Christ. I think nowadays, institutional trust has tanked, and nobody trusts institutions no matter what they are. And whereas when I was growing up, if you use the phrase, abuse scandal, you would almost always put the word church at the start of that phrase, church abuse scandal. Certainly in the United Kingdom, BBC abuse scandal, or the Football Association abuse scandal, or any number of other scouting abuse scandal, or schools abuse scandal. Church does not uniquely fit in that one place. And I think people are waking up to the fact that hypocrisy and abuse are not uniquely Christian sins, but are universal human sins.
Yeah.
And that the lack of institutional heft in culture is ultimately not a great thing. The fact that we've been so atomized and now we are just blown about by algorithmic winds with nothing to belong to apart from our own personal preferences, that is not a superior position to the bad old days when there was thick community, where you belonged to the Scouts and you belonged to the Football Association and you belonged to this political movement and you went to church on a Sunday. I think there are a lot of people who miss the thick bonds of relationship and institutional trust which we used to enjoy in society, And now there are a lot of people who actually say it's a good thing to go to church on a Sunday. And I'm finding that in my evangelism, and I'm finding that in the churches where I'm preaching. People are showing up, younger people are showing up. And actually, if you've been scrolling through TikTok all week, you know that you ought to touch grass. You know that you ought to unplug, and you ought to, get IRL. And in real life, you can come to this thing that has existed for centuries, where you do a little, spiritual detox, right? And where you meet in community with other people, and where you confess out loud that you've been a moron this week, spiritually speaking, and where you give thanks for the many things that you have to give thanks for, and where there is embodied ancient wisdom that you can engage with. And actually, I think the phrase that I'm spiritual but not religious, I think the heyday for that phrase was actually in the 1990s and the 2000s, and to a degree in the 2010s. I'm meeting more and more people who say, I'm religious but not spiritual. And what they're actually saying is, I am sick of being blown about by vibes. I want something thicker, relationally and institutionally. I want to be grounded in something that's bigger than me. And actually, I'll go to church, and actually, I might even start going to more traditional styles of church, which are liturgical, which are sacramental, which are embodied, which are that go back centuries. I think there's a deep hunger for that, actually, and that's an opportunity for us.
That is so true, because we are seeing this trend of people going back to more traditional religions, if we can say that. Like, not so much in Italy, that has been influenced by Roman Catholicism for centuries, but at least I'm hearing many American friends that, for instance, are saying that some of their friends that used to go to a Protestant church, an evangelical church, they are now going to a Roman Catholic church or an Orthodox church, and so maybe that is because of what you were just saying, that some people are looking for more liturgical and structured, maybe kind of institutions, even within the church. But then how can we show people again that the important thing is not maybe the how, but the who, because it's true that both in spiritual but not religious, and in the religious but not spiritual kind of thing, we can miss Jesus, and is the only way of salvation. And so how can we, what would you say to a person that is either one of them, that Jesus is that Jesus is the only answer? It's not about the how, but it's more about the who.
Yeah, and that's important to say to people, no matter why they are interested. If they're interested from the spiritual side of things, if they're interested from the religious side of things, first of all, be aware that everybody who comes to church is coming for mixed motives. The pastor of your church goes to church for mixed motives. The pastor is being paid to be there. Absolutely everybody goes to church for the wrong reason, me included. And we need to be converted to the right reason by church. And that's why in church, we need to just put Jesus front and center. Because I would say that Jesus, it's not even that he is the only way to salvation. He is salvation. Like, he is the eternal life of God, the Son of the Father, filled with the Spirit, who's been offered to the world as our brother to live our life, die our death, rise again, and invite us into his eternal life, the life that he shares with the Father, the life that he shares with the Spirit. That's now ours in Christ, and we need to lift up Jesus in every way that we possibly can. And so, and I need to be converted to that. I'm a Christian, and I need to be evangelized. I'm a Christian, and I need to, and I've gone to church this Sunday for the wrong reason. And that's why it's very important that in church, what I am offered is not something that just, scratches my itch. What I'm offered is the thing that I've forgotten that I need. And that thing is not a thing. That thing is Jesus himself. And so I think it's really clarifying to recognize that nobody is coming through the doors of a church ever for the right reason. And everybody is needing to be reminded, oh, yeah, Jesus. In other words, everybody needs to be evangelized all the time, starting with me.
No, that I agree. The same with me. I think it was Tim Keller that said that we are not only saved by the gospel, but we should live by the gospel, and that it meant, that we need to be evangelized constantly, and there's not like a moment where you stop going to Sunday school and you stop hearing about the basics, because you need to be reminded by the basics all the time. So yeah, it's so true.
One of the lines that Tim Keller would say is that the gospel is not the ABCs; it is the A to Z, the A to Z.
Yeah.
As he would say. Yeah. And therefore, it's not that I need to go back to the gospel because I need to be reminded of simple things. It's that the gospel is the very profound things. Like God became man and went to hell for you. Right.
Yeah.
That is I just spoke the most bizarre sentence that takes 2,000 years of church history and reflection to even, attempt to scratch the surface of what I even mean by saying that. And so, yeah, we constantly need the gospel, not because the gospel is just the ABCs, but because the gospel is the A to Z. Yeah.
Yeah. So you say Z, you don't say Z. In Australia.
In English,
yeah. Like in England. Okay. No, this just a minor thing, but that I find it interesting.
Yeah.
My wife is English, so she says that. But anyway, talking about, so we're basically talking about orthodoxy and what the gospel is and what we are preaching and all that. But being relevant is also something that we want to be. And Jesus was relevant to the times, and I guess if Jesus was preaching today, he would have used different parables compared to the ones that he was using back then. But argue with me if you don't agree with me. But the question that I'm asking myself, and I want to ask you, is there a version of relevance that is actually a subtle form of unbelief, a lack of confidence that the gospel, as it is enough?
Yeah, 100%. And I think the way we get to relevance is by first plumbing the depths of faithfulness to the gospel message. And I think the way to reach out to the world is to go deep with the gospel message that we've been given. You get breadth when you get first depth. And if you just reach for breadth before you get depth, I think you end up being faithless, actually. And it's interesting that you said about Jesus, like he would tell different stories today. Yes, that is true. But I think the stories that Jesus tells are largely stories of defamiliarization rather than familiarization. The stories Jesus tells, like he would just say, imagine a man who lights a lamp and then puts an upturned bucket over the top of it. Imagine that. You're like, what? That's bizarre. What are you talking about? You're talking about something that's so strange. Or like when he talks about the prodigal son, like this is not familiar behavior from any father. And he's not giving parenting advice. Like if your younger son comes and wants the inheritance, here's what you should do. Like he's not giving and the behavior of the people in his stories is so bizarre. There was once a sower of seed, and he went out and he chucked fistfuls of seed on the path where the birds came and ate it up. You moron! You utter imbecile. And every farmer in the crowd would be like, this is the worst sower. I've never met a sower like this. This is not familiar behavior. Or what shepherd of 100 sheep, if one gets lost, will not abandon 99 sheep on the hill? No shepherd who's listening to Jesus says, oh, he's absolutely right. That's what we would do. It's like, he's not trying to build familiarity with any of his stories. He's actually trying to defamiliarize people. Like, I totally believe in telling stories. But I don't think what Jesus does is try to tell a very familiar story in the culture and then bring it around to a spiritual truth. I think he's trying to kind of paint these really strange pictures. And I think the gospel is a really strange story in which God shows up on planet Earth, goes to the cross to prove that he's God, and dies in God-forsaken agony as the greatest demonstration of his divinity. And then rises up again as this battle-scarred warrior and says peace to everybody, and then disappears. And then like the church has got a mission to like this is a strange story. Like,
Yeah.
So, but you keep on telling that strange story, and you become relevant. You keep pressing into the strangeness, and you push through into a familiarity. And I look at the history of creativity in the church. If you go to the religious art section of the art gallery where you live, you'll go into these, corridor after corridor of depictions of death by torture. This is in the religious wing of the art gallery is the most brutal horror show in the art gallery. The religious wing is showing death by torture because it's got Christ crucified on all these different canvases, because for century after century, millennium after millennium, actually, we have been telling the strange story to the point where now we walk through the art gallery and we look at 100 depictions of death by torture and we go, sacred art, and we don't realize that actually the very strangeness of the gospel has totally recalibrated our sensibilities and made us to see that sacrifice is glorious. And this bloodied human victim is the great victor over sin, death, and hell. And therefore, I think that is the way to get relevant. The way to get relevant is to really go deeply into the strange integrity of the Jesus story, and to absolutely camp out there. And from there, having immersed yourself faithfully in the strange world of the Bible in which that human victim on the cross is Lord, and having recalibrated, rethought everything you thought was important and glorious, then you go out into your culture, and then you're just like, I now have new spectacles, new lenses, new glasses through which to see the world and to see it anew and see it right. And you become relevant by first being faithful to the Jesus story.
Yeah. And that's what we want to do. Is like our motto is "Glitter times anchor to the rock." And so I guess from what you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, you're defining being relevant as using the same language as other people, but the content of what you're saying is not what should be considered normal by others. So what Jesus was saying was abnormal, was strange to people, but the language you were using, it was something that they knew.
Understood Hebrew.
Yeah.
And the language thing is really actually very important. Like the New Testament is written not in Hebrew or Aramaic, the language of Israel. Yeah. It is written in Greek, which is the international lingua franca. It is the language of trade. It's the language that's going to be understood by the nations. And when the Apostle Paul writes his letter in Greek to Corinth, he sort of says, look, your worship services are an absolute zoo. There's no order to them whatsoever. And you're using languages, and we can get into a conversation about what tongues are, but I need you to translate your strange languages, your strange tongues, into an understandable language for everybody who comes, because there are seekers who are coming to your services, that's interesting. But he doesn't say translate what you're saying into an understandable language so that people leave Sunday morning saying, oh, good, I understood that. No. Translate it so that they fall on their face and say, God is really among you. That actually you're making plain to them the strangeness of the gospel, such that they say, this is from out of this world, right? And And so that translation work is very important, but the translation work is not so that there's a familiarity. It's actually so that people can properly understand how different the Jesus message is. And I think that's really interesting. And you get some works of contextualization. They're all about, let's just translate the language so that people are on the same page. And Paul's like, don't do that. But also don't just be so strange. And, you might be an Orthodox congregation that still does your divine liturgy in the same language as was said in the 8th century, and no one who's there actually speaks the language that and nobody understands the prayers that you're praying. And Paul's like, don't do that either. How do we do both? Yeah, how do we speak the local language but not worship the local gods? That is the missionary task in every age. You speak the local language and you don't worship the local gods.
So we're saying, the content remains the same, but the form of communication is the one that needs to be relevant to the society and people that we are trying to reach.
Yes,
you'd say.
Yeah, and if there is a strangeness to the message, that's not always a bad sign. And if people are like, I don't really get that, don't automatically think, therefore I need to alter something about the message. Maybe there's a difference there that needs to be there, and that needs to confront people. Like when Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1, we preach Christ crucified, and that's just going to be a stumbling block to Jews. It's like you've just thrown a massive boulder in their path. They're happily going down the road, and then they stub their toe on the gospel. They stub their toe on Christ and Him crucified, and they're like, ouch, why would you do that? That's that's not very contextualized. No. Actually, there's something that's so arresting. There's something that's so strange and unfamiliar and defamiliarizing. And Paul is like, no, that's good. That's good gospel proclamation. It's good gospel proclamation to not give people what they want, because the Jews will be looking for miraculous signs and the Greeks will be looking for philosophical wisdom. Don't give them what they want. If you were to translate the cross into the sort of thing that the Jews are looking for in that moment, if you were to translate the cross into the sort of thing that the Greek philosophers are looking for, you have failed to be faithful. You've failed to preach the cross. So yeah, not all forms of contextualization are faithful.
Yeah. It's true that sometimes we talk to people and they come to us with a different, they're trying to find something different than what we want to give them.
Yeah.
And either because they're skeptical about what we're saying, or because, I don't know, they just, I don't know if it ever happened to you, but you talk to a person, that person really wants to have another kind of conversation. And I guess that you've had many conversations and some of them with skepticals. But what would you give as a piece of advice based on experience? So maybe you should just tell us if you had an experience where, we're talking to a skeptical person and because of that, you found yourself kind of softening the message of the gospel. Because it's true that the gospel is offensive in some way. It should offend us. And because it's strange, because it's counterintuitive in some things and all that. So have you ever found yourself softening the gospel? And what did it feel like? What happened? What did you learn from it?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of specifics. I think it was very striking when Wes Huff went on to Stephen Bartlett's podcast, and Stephen Bartlett had a Bible open in front of him and was reading out verses from Matthew's gospel, weeping and wailing and the gnashing of teeth, outer darkness. Am I going to hell, Wes Huff? And I really respect Wes for just saying yes. Stephen Bartlett's, you in your current state are headed there. And whatever there is, whatever those words mean, that is not good. And and you need to course correct, as it were. And I think that was arresting to hear Wes say that as an uncompromising declaration of the truth that I think has made Stephen Bartlett think again And I hope that I would have been as forthright as Wes in that moment. And in one sense, I think the way to handle that is actually to take the language that Stephen Bartlett is presenting to you from Scripture and say, okay, I don't want to just affirm that. I actually want to press into that, because maybe the thing to do, and if Stephen Bartlett has said that to me, I think I pray that I would have the courage and the faithfulness to say, yes, Stephen, that is your situation right now. And don't you see how this makes sense of life? Don't you see how every time you've made a decision that has gone against your own ways of integrity, you've headed into outer darkness? Don't you see how disconnection from love always does lead to the gnashing of teeth? Don't you see how estrangement from God feels like weeping and wailing? And let's press into this language all the more and kind of do that. I pray that I would have the forthrightness to do that, but it is true that we are all prone to seek approval from people, rather than to seek approval from Jesus, and that's something we've constantly got to be repenting of and returning to Jesus for strengthening and help.
Yeah. I can think of times where it was difficult for me to answer that question that Wes had to answer. I watched that episode, and one of the times that it happens is when you talk to a young person and the young person asks you, what if I become a Christian and my parents don't? Will they go to hell?
Good.
And you wanna. I mean, you kind of feel like I wanna tell you. I would like to tell you no, because I know you care about them, and but the reality is that yes, if Jesus is not the salvation, if Jesus is not the savior and the hope, but then my question is, how, I think, can you give me advice on how to be sensitive in those kind of instances, and not, because I think it's different to be sensitive and to be afraid to say the truth. How can we be sensitive and not afraid to say the truth at the same time?
There would be a way of being forthright, and you could think of yourself as being very bold for Jesus and saying something that's untrue and completely unhelpful. Yes, your parents are going to hell. Like you don't know. I don't know. In terms of I don't know the eternal destiny of anybody, and so long as they have breath in their lungs, there is hope, right? And the last moments of people's lives, being a minister I'm an ordained minister in the church. I've spoken to many people at the end of life, and I've spoken to many people who have come to Christ at the end of life, in a very mixed sort of a way, and they're so drugged up to the eyeballs, and yet they've prayed, and I don't know what any of that means. So sometimes it is unfaithful to bring clarity when you don't yourself have clarity, and when it is illegitimate to claim clarity on a question. So sometimes the most truthful answer that has the most integrity is I don't know. And so it is worth being aware of that. I think on the question of that more generally, eternal judgment and that sort of thing, like, my bottom line is I don't say who goes up or down. I know a guy who does, and I totally trust him. I trust him with family members who I love, and I don't know where they stood with Jesus. I trust him with friends who have died, and I don't know where they stood with Jesus. And I don't get to say who goes up or down. But I trust the guy who came down from the judgment seat, put himself into the docks, and took the harshest judgment there's ever been, so that people need not go to hell if only they say, Lord. I trust him with that. And so, I mean, that is my bottom line. And that I think is where we need to. There are times when being more clear or more forthright is not always being more truthful. At the end of the day, we trust Jesus with these things rather than announce ourselves.
I like what you're saying is it's like when I feel like sometimes when somebody asks me a question, if we saw the question as a camera, if I feel like the camera now is pointing at me, and so I have to give the answer to the question. Whereas what you're saying is more like pointing out the camera, to Jesus and changing the perspective, and it's not me choosing who's gonna go to hell, to heaven. It's Jesus, and I trust him because yeah. So I like that. Yeah,
I don't know. It's very important. To say, I don't know, and it's very important to say I share that question and I don't have an answer to it. It's really important. It's not just that, okay, you haven't failed in your task of answering the question if you say you don't know. It's actually a positive gain if you say, I don't know, and I find that a really difficult question myself. But that doesn't stop me from being a Christian. I think that's just so important for Christians and non-Christians to know, because non-Christians assume that they've got to have all 17 questions that they've got perfectly answered so that then they can jump into an unquestioning faith. Well, Christians feel like if I've got questions, maybe that means I'm not a Christian. And like, I think both Christians and non-Christians need to realize Christians have far more questions than non-Christians do. We have far more because it's more important for us, and we've got a bigger stake in Jesus and in the whole Christian thing. And so of course I've got questions that are unresolved, but the whole thing about being a Christian is not that I have all the answers. It's just I know a guy who does, and I trust him with the things I don't know.
Yeah. And I think it's also because we kind of feel the urge to present the gospel in some way when we have conversations. Like we are talking about evangelism, and that's the mission that God gave to us, that Jesus gave to us as soon, before he ascended. It was like, go and make disciples. And so I guess the difficulty sometimes is how can we be, because there needs to be some kind of curiosity towards people. Like, I want to get to know you before I want to get you saved. Otherwise I can't understand you, and I can't really be relevant, and I can't really speak to you and tell you the things that you need and be guided by the Spirit, because I think God guides us in the conversation that we have and all this kind of stuff. But how, in your experience, and you mentioned you're an ordained minister in the church, and you've had, I guess, many conversations with people that you didn't know beforehand, that you maybe you met for the first time. How do you balance the being curious part about people and that part of where you want to just tell them, about the gospel? I don't know if my question is clear, but yeah.
I think one thing that's been really clarifying for me in evangelism is just taking very seriously that Jesus never tells me to be a better evangelist. He never tells me to be a more shining light. He never tells me to do a better job at witnessing, ever. He says, Acts chapter 1, verse 8, you will be my witnesses. You will be. He says, Matthew chapter 5, you are the light of the world. You just are. My main problem is that I'm a lamp that I'm constantly trying to put an upturned bucket on, right? I'm hiding my light under a bushel. I'm actively trying not to be distinctive. I'm actively trying to be embarrassed about my Christian distinctiveness. And Jesus is just like, stop not evangelizing. Stop not being a witness. He never tells me to crank up the lumens on the light. He doesn't tell me to be a better witness. Like I am a witness. So, I mean, and isn't it interesting in Matthew 28, he doesn't say go and make converts. He says go and make disciples. And I am simply to let my light shine before others, that they may see in my good deeds and glorify God, and glorify my Father in heaven, or to put it in the 1 Peter 2 verse 12 terms, let your light shine before others. Let your good deeds. because I always mix up Matthew 5 and 1 Peter 2.
Yeah.
They're so similar. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they may accuse you of doing wrong, they may glorify God on the day he visits us. It's just like, just do your thing. Just do the Jesus thing. Let your light shine. And God will do with your witness what God will do with your witness. Just stop being embarrassed of Jesus. Stop hiding your Christian distinctiveness. So one of the ways that you're going to be distinctive is that you're going to be concerned about the person in front of you, because Jesus was. He was always concerned with the person in front of him. You will shine with the light of Christ, and you're not waiting for their lips to stop moving so that you can then pounce on them and wrench the conversation from where it was to this other thing called evangelism. Nonsense. You're just to shine. You're just to be who you are in that conversation, and just don't mute your Christian distinctiveness, and let the Holy Spirit do what the Holy Spirit's going to do with both your deeds before your friend and your words before your friend. But you can't convert anybody. So just be who you are. Just let your light shine.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So going towards the end of our conversation, and talking specifically about youth evangelism, what you know about England, but the rest of the world. What gives you the most hope when you look at the state of youth evangelism today? And what do you think?
Well, there's been a lot of controversy in the UK about a year ago. A report was released that surveyed a lot of people in Britain. It surveyed like 19,000 people back in 2018 and another 13,000 people in 2024. It was a massive survey. But the survey company that ran it said that they didn't run proper controls on the people who were part of the survey, and so we can't really trust the data. But people got very excited about it. They called it a quiet revival because it talked about people being much more willing to go to church than they used to be. And so people have kind of shelved that report, which is called the quiet revival. Now, I think calling it a revival was always questionable. What it is, though, is a great opportunity, because even if those people who said that they go to church aren't actually going to church yet, the fact that they're willing to say that they do, and the fact that in so many other reports and surveys, definitely Gen Z and Gen Alpha are certainly more spiritually open than Gen X ever was. It's not a quiet revival. It is a great opportunity. And what we should take courage from is there is more of a social permission for people to investigate Christianity. There's more of a social permission to identify as Christian. There's more of a social permission to say, I'm going to try church now. There's more of a social permission to order a Bible from Amazon and just see where that leads you. And therefore, let's do what we should have done even when there wasn't such a social permission, which is to be bold, which is to invite people to church, which is to say to our friends, have you ever read a gospel? Have you ever read one of these biographies of Jesus? They're awesome, actually. The fact that invitation will be more warmly received now should give us more encouragement to make the invitation. But we should make the invitation whether it's warmly received or not, right? But it is a very good thing that faith is being talked about in more open terms culturally. And no, it hasn't been a quiet revival, but it is a big opportunity. And so Christians, let's just resolve to let our light shine before others, to boldly own our Christian distinctiveness, and just to sow those seeds into conversations. Just say things like, that's what I love about Jesus, ... and see where the conversation goes. Or that's what I love about my church, ... Or that's what I love about being a Christian, ... Or I could never have gotten through this dark time in life without Jesus, ... Finish those sentences off and let's see where they go. But I'm hopeful that those conversations are a little bit easier now than they were a few years ago. So let's be bold and scatter the seed.
Yeah. That's so true, and thank you. I guess social media gave us the opportunity to speak more, and so they made evangelism more conversational. And so having those conversations that are very simple, we don't need a big stage to do that, or anything, whole setup. In conversations, we can talk about God and how Jesus changed our lives, and and that's powerful because is the message, is the content of all of the conversation. But yeah, thank you for for this. Thank you for taking the time to have this conversation. I think it was very helpful, and it will be to many. So
absolute pleasure, Roberto. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Hopefully I'll see you soon in Italy, where it's warmer. But
Fine.
But yeah, yes. But thank you. Have a good day. See you soon.
Bless you, man.